Now that Ben has finished his cupcake, it is time to record a podcast. Welcome to Ben and Matt's Marvellous Journey, episode 11. This is a deep dive into the history of the MCU as we count down towards the 10-year anniversary and Avengers Infinity War. It's not Infinity War this time, it's Avengers Age of Ultron, so it's sort of quite fitting. But yeah, I am Matt Waters. I am joined, as always, by comic book and television aficionado Ben Phillips. How are you this evening?
I'm good. Only one of those things is relevant to this discussion.
I'm sure you'll find a way to talk about TV shows that some of these people were in. James Spader's in The Blacklist. And The Office.
I've never watched an episode of The Blacklist.
I hear it's good, but we do not have the time because this one might be the longest one we ever do. So go to entertherealworld.com, check out a bunch of our content from Broadcast Depth. There's an awesome Lost podcast that is not hosted by us, so that means you'll probably like it more. And just, check everything out because you should. Anyway, this is probably going to be one of our longer episodes because this movie has a lot happening and there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff and a lot of legacy stuff, and it's loved and hated, and just I don't really know how to go about tackling it, but luckily I made like 10 pages of notes anyway because I'm a nerd. So Avengers Age of Ultron, I think, I like to start with the overalls before we get into it, but the most notable thing is this is, in gossip terms, the film that broke Joss Whedeon, who had basically was the architect for Marvel for the entirety of Phase 2. Like, he had, in his contract, he had full creative control between Avengers 1 and Avengers 2. He directed scenes, he rewrote scenes, he was their head consultant, he got a TV show off the ground for them. And then after this, no more. Has not touched a Marvel film since, and in fact has jumped ship to DC where he directed Justice League late in the game, and he may or may not be doing Batgirl. Last I heard, I think he dropped out of that, but that was a fun rumour for a while.
I think there's a slate that's been rumoured to be coming out soon that's got Batgirl on it, whether or not Joss Whedon's attached. I've got no idea.
They're smart to make that, though. Francis Ford Coppola retired officially because of how much he hates this film, which I doubt he's even seen, but he just cited it as an example of what's wrong with the industry, and then he was like, fuck all of this, I'm retiring. So Joss Whedon in fact cites The Godfather 2 as an influence for this film, and he'll be thrilled to know that he made one of his idols retire, so good going there. I will say it's absolutely packed with really fun moments and amazing scenes, but the biggest thing here, my most poignant comment I can make, is the connective tissue just is not as organic as it is in the first film. There's some rushed scenes, some underplayed moments, some stuff that doesn't seem to make sense.
Yeah, we're 3 years at this point from the release of this movie, and I still can't quite nail down how I feel about it.
Yeah, it's a really weird one. I will not allow anyone to talk shit about it, but I also cannot say this is definitely in the top 5 or anything close to that. But so it sits like firmly in the middle of the pack for me because I don't know. I will not allow it to be badmouthed, but I will badmouth it for probably 2 hours now.
Yeah, it's messy as all fuck, and there's some of it which is like some of my favourite stuff that we've done in the MCU, but it definitely feels less cohesive than anything they've done beforehand. And I think that's what makes it so interesting. Like, this is the one that I'm probably most excited to talk about because everything else is like...
The good ones are good, the bad ones are bad, but this is a whole other animal.
Yeah, this isn't Iron Man 3 where like everyone's clearly divided. I feel like there are people who love it, people who hate it, and then everyone else is kind of in the middle confused.
I feel it's kind of forgotten about. Marvel continues to be an absolute juggernaut and everything, but people don't really talk about this movie as like, oh, remember when that happened in this one? It's like, why not? There's so many cool moments.
And it's the second highest grossing movie in the franchise as well, which makes it even weirder.
You're just eating my lunch now, aren't you? So released May the 1st, 2015. Very close to that anniversary date, but not quite. There has not been a superhero movie since Guardians of the Galaxy, so they get that nice uninterrupted streak, which will continue because they will manage to release 3 movies without any other superhero ones coming out in this little span. So, good or bad, Marvel are here. They exist.
Yeah, I mean, what, Sony have quit at this point.
Sony tapped out after Amazing Spider-Man 2. They hate Andrew Garfield. Listen to Big Spideas, a Spider-Man review podcast by me and Mike Thomas, available on soundcloud.com/Mike and Matt. Sorry, go on.
And then Fox have they've gone to go sit in a corner and rethink everything after they've got everyone back for their big movie.
Yeah, they had some bangers, but then it just fizzled after that. Again, go listen to Mike and Matt's Excellent Adventures if you want to hear talk about Fox's endeavours into the world of superheroics. This film is 141 minutes, so it's 2 minutes shorter than The Avengers, but it sure does not feel it. And it's 6 minutes shorter than Civil War. And again, it does not feel it. Budget of $316 million, far and away the most expensive film they've ever made. They did a ton of reshoots. There are 3,000 visual effects shots in it, which is the most of any Marvel movie, ahead of Guardians, which is the second most expensive movie they made. We discussed that last time. I still don't know how the first one cost so much more than the second. Maybe they built tech that they then reused the second time or something like that. But those are the two highest budgets they've ever done. No word officially yet on the Infinity War budget that I know of. I would imagine the actors' salaries alone will probably push it way up there.
It's also one we'll probably never get a decent number on because it'll be 2 movies budget.
That's true. Very, very wise. However, they did see a return on that $316 million because this movie made $1.4 billion, ever so slightly less than The Avengers 1. It is still the 7th highest grossing film of all time as we record here, because Black Panther is rapidly climbing its way into the history books. And again, as of recording, we don't know those numbers. But maybe by the time you listen to it, this film will have somehow made over $1 billion. That seems unlikely, but
as of recording, Black Panther has grossed more than Thor, Captain America 1 and The Incredible Hulk.
Yes.
To date this podcast.
Yes. Oh, Black Panther's good. You should see it. So, directed and written by Joss Whedeon, much like the first movie. And, well, it is a sequel to The Avengers. They announced it in May 2012. Whedon officially signed on in August of 2012. He turned in a first draft by April. He talked about wanting to make it a smaller and more personal film, something that Kevin Feige to this day says, that's what we wanted too. And yeah, this movie's pretty big. Captain Marvel was in an early draft. They even did visual effects work on her flying in at the end to join the team, but they reused it for Scarlet Witch. He wanted Spider-Man to be in that little scene at the end where they're introducing the new team as well. But he was a little bit ahead of his time because they didn't have the rights back yet. Abomination was also in the film inexplicably at one point, although I guess if Ultron wants people that hate the Avengers, he'd be a prime candidate to get kicked into some trees. They did lots and lots of filming, they did lots and lots of reshoots, and there's a fair bit O-drama surrounding all of that. Idris Elba in particular, not a fan of being summoned. They announced 2 sequels to this movie, which, still have not come out. One of them's coming soon. They announced them before this movie even came out, so that is confidence right there. And I feel this might be the biggest trailer they ever did, because I remember when the trailer for this dropped, and it leaked early in bad format, and then they were like, oh, Hydra are to blame for that, and they released the real one, and I think the response to that was enormous. In my mind, anyway, that's one of the bigger trailers they've ever dropped.
First time that it felt like a Disney movie, because obviously it's got that Pinocchio re-recording. I remember that the first Avengers trailer, but I feel like Avengers hadn't crested the peak.
It wasn't in the zeitgeist, whereas this is like peak, like Marvel are a powerhouse. There's another Avengers movie coming out. Because, people didn't know they loved the Avengers until it happened. Whereas this time it's like, oh, they're making another one. And I vividly remember that trailer dropping and it getting an enormous reaction. You kind of already went over who the Avengers are the last time we did this in terms of like who they are in the comics, so I'm not going to ask you to do that again. I mean, it's pretty obvious that they slightly tweak these characters to resemble their film counterparts over time. So instead, why don't you give us a little bit of a lowdown on the history of Ultron? Because, I mean, Joss Whedon had him pegged to be the villain because he is such an iconic Avengers villain. One of the more sort of consistent, long-running Avengers foes that there is Ultron. And also we're going to get some new characters here in Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. So feel free to throw anything else in you want, but that's what we're probably going to focus with your little comic roundup. Go for it.
So, I mean, Ultron's probably the definitive Avengers villain, apart from maybe Kang.
I would say so, because Thanos has been sort of made that way retroactively, but just over time it's increased. But historically, Ultron is the one, I think.
Yeah, like Ultron is the one who is tied to the Avengers in that he was created by Hank Pym, who was a founding member of the Avengers, not by Tony Stark, as this movie decides to change.
Smart change. Why wouldn't the robotics guy make a robot?
Created by Roy Thomas and John Buscema in 1968. So this is just after Stan Lee and Jack Kirby have kind of, well, not just after, but like Stan Lee and Jack Kirby did not create the villain of this one. Shock horror, and basically become this recurring thorn in the side of the Avengers ever since. Probably the most noteworthy thing he did in his first couple of appearances was he created another robot called Vision, who, I'm not going to get
Sorry, Ben. The Vision, please.
The Vision. I'm not going to get into the really fucked up, weird family dynamics that go on with this stuff, because this movie kind of drops a lot of that stuff. If you want to go have fun, go look at the family tree of like Ultron, Vision, Hank Pym, and like everything related to that, because your head will start to just throb slowly.
You read about Jocasta, wow.
Who is also very briefly in this movie.
It's in my trivia, don't you worry.
The twins are another one of those thorny sides. So in the comics, they are occasionally the children of Magneto.
Yeah, every time they try and make that not the case, I don't enjoy it. Like, it breaks their characters for me, but hey-ho.
So they first showed up in X-Men number 4. They are actual creations of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. They appeared a couple of times and then basically got moved over to the Avengers books, where actually the bulk of their like kind of 60s, 70s, 80s careers are spent as Avengers before they kind of transition back to being X-Men characters. Scarlet Witch.
Yeah, because of course Days of Future Past has come out by now, so Fox have put Quicksilver out into the mainstream, and Evan Peters' take on that did really, really well. Like that scene was phenomenally popular, and we had this interesting situation where Marvel are allowed to use them too, because they did spend more of their time in Avengers books, I feel, than they did X-Men ones. Yeah, it's one of those, as a child of the 90s and someone who's the bulk of their early comic book knowledge came from X-Men cartoons, and those cartoons, like, I definitely did think of them as X-Men before Avengers, but then when you go back and read this stuff, you go like, oh no, they are so much more immersed in Avengers culture, probably Scarlet Witch more than I was going to say, Quicksilver does the rounds. He was in Humans for a long while.
And then Scarlet Witch is, I mean, she's the one who's in the comic book, she marries Vision, has children with Vision.
Gross.
So she spends a lot of time around there. They're two very weird characters. Obviously, Scarlet Witch is one of the most iconic moments in Marvel Comics history.
Yeah, she broke everything. She said no more mutants and just destroyed X-Men continuity for a decade almost.
So that's very briefly kind of like who these guys are. I mean, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, they were part of the Avengers team, which was the second incarnation, which is when Iron Man, Thor, Hulk kind of left. It was basically Cap, Hawkeye, Quicksilver, and Scarlet Witch, which, when you think about it, is a fucking weird team.
Yep.
But it's one of those very iconic early lineups that obviously, like, it's one of those things where, like, it's still weird that we haven't had Ant-Man and Wasp on this Avengers team, but Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver obviously show that, like, Joss is a fan of a very particular flavour of Avengers lineups.
If Joss had his way, we would have had both those characters, but on special favour to Edgar Wright, Marvel agreed to not put them in anything until Ant-Man came out. So,
which is fair. The other thing we want to mention is this movie borrows its title from a comic book limited series called Age of Ultron, written by Brian Michael Bendis.
Exact same plot, right?
Not at all. That plot has alternate histories, multiple Wolverines. It's very weird. It was written in kind of two chunks. Brian Hitch did the artwork for about 2 years before the actual issues came out and broke time, but then nothing ever came of it, and still nothing has really come of breaking time.
Yeah, that did happen, didn't it? Is that the one that closes with Angela?
It is the one that closes. It is the one that closes with Angela.
Don't just call it Angela like that. Angela. Anyway.
Angela. Yeah, it was a weird time. And then, most notably, in the history of Avengers comics, the most notable thing is that Jonathan Hickman has taken over on his universe-breaking run on the Avengers and New Avengers.
The single most amazing long-term piece of storytelling I've seen in modern comics. Jonathan Hickman's sort of run on Avengers and New Avengers leading up.
And I will still stand by the fact that Fantastic Four is better.
That's fine. Let's just talk about things that we really, really like that have got nothing to do with this. No, we must talk about this movie. So it is a sequel to the Avengers. The plot is bananas in that I attempted to write a short synopsis that ballooned out to a page because I was trying to think of everything major that happens. Don't worry, shrunk that right down. So the Avengers are battling Ultron, which is an AI designed by Tony Stark, brought to life by an Infinity Stone, and goes rogue and aims to eliminate humanity to protect the planet. Classic robot shit. Ultron is aided by Wanda and Pietro Maximoff, as we said, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. They help sow dissent within the ranks of the Avengers, who are already bickering a little bit. And, while they do ultimately win, and many things happen along the way, it does leave the team forever a little bit changed. And there are some long-term ramifications from this movie. So some of these movies, we move through them sort of scene by scene or like section by section and talk about them. That can be a lot of fun, but that would take forever with this. So I have broken this up into handy little chunks for us to latch onto, and you can, of course, feel free to throw anything else in there you want. So the biggest thing is this Joss Whedon burnout. At times, the story is sort of written in a way that like it's Joss Whedon versus Marvel and they're clashing heads. I don't think it is quite as dramatic as that, but it is certainly a film that took a toll on Joss Whedon. He said going into it he wanted it to be a less rushed production. I personally didn't get the sense that Avengers 1 was rushed. It seemed very well executed. Though despite his intention to do that, Chris Hemsworth and Chris Evans admitted they didn't know the plot of the film while they were making it, which is great stuff. Chris Evans didn't know the title of the film until the Comic-Con sort of announcement came. Anthony Mackie didn't know he was an Avenger at the end of the movie until he saw it. So, you know, a very well put together production that ran smoothly. And I mentioned it earlier, but he wanted to make this intimate film, and there are scenes that we will be talking about that go towards that. The farm, the dream sequences, stuff like that. But then these were the very scenes that Marvel allegedly were gunning to have cut down or removed entirely. Because the most hated on scene in the whole film, and probably rightfully so, the stuff with Thor splashing about in a cave. Joss wanted that to be longer. And on the commentary for the film, he acknowledged that some people think it's too much, some people think it's not enough. I agree. It either needed to be gone or it needed to make more sense. He had filmed and written a version that was much longer and would have clarified some things, and then Marvel said, you need to cut this down, and he was like, well, I don't really want to, and they're like, alright, if you want to keep it at this length, you have to lose things from the farm, or you have to lose some of the dream sequences, and those were his favourite things, so he kept them. Fair play to him, staying true to his artistic vision, and you know, making a film that is his, but I do feel this is an instance that harmed the overall continuity of the MCU, because that cave scene, man, do you know what is going on there?
Thor goes to a cave, and
Yes.
then he gets an info dump off screen about what Infinity Stones are, which is less comprehensive than the one in Guardians of the Galaxy, and is just kind of confusing.
Yes, after going to some awful building to meet Eric Selvig.
Oi! Do not discredit the name of the Founders Building at Royal Holloway, University of London, as the title helpfully says. My alma mater.
Oh, look at you using the word.
That was a fun day when someone posted a picture on Facebook of Joss Whedon walking around campus and was like, what the fuck?
Oh, where were you when that was happening?
I graduated,
Oh,
sadly.
you'd already graduated. Oh, that sucks. It took 6 months of filming. They filmed in Italy, Korea, South Africa, England, Bangladesh, America. They did a lot of reshoots very late on. And they were so busy doing all of this that Aaron Taylor-Johnson had to point out no one had organised a wrap party, so Joss Whedon dragged them all around snowy Italy to try and find somewhere to host a wrap party for the Avengers 2. They did find somewhere, but it just goes to show how hectic this film was and like how much Joss poured into this. And the biggest thing is he has admitted that he struggled immensely with juggling the cast, because I mean, I feel that's the reason he got the gig in the first place, is that he is used to doing ensembles like Buffy, Firefly, many other things. So, you know, he has that specialty, and I as we mentioned when we talked about the Avengers, one of the biggest strengths is how well balanced everyone is. Not the case here. Captain America, 50 minutes of screen time on the upper end. Thor, 14 minutes. And I'm rounding here, so it could have been less than that. The Vision manages 9, and he doesn't show up until like 2/3 of the way through. But Thor with 14 minutes of screen time is crazy. Good luck, Russo brothers, because you have an even bigger cast than this. I wonder if it's that Joss directed and wrote this, so the pressure is even higher, and also he's one person, whereas with the main team they have now of the Russo brothers and Marcus and McFeely, that's 2 sets of 2 people with separate jobs, so hopefully that spreads the burden a bit. But yeah, this film does a much worse job of giving everyone storylines and like things to do. Like Thor is just kind of standing around. Cap, while he gets a ton of like little action scenes, he feels a bit lost.
The only people who really kind of get stories are like Black Widow and Hulk,
Yeah.
Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, and then Hawkeye gets like, they're the only ones that like feel like they get like a complete arc at the end of this. Even Iron Man, the guy who's supposed to be like atoning like what he's done, doesn't really atone for making the villain of this movie. And Vision's the one that kills him, that kills Ultron at the end, which is, it makes sense, but it's weird because surely it should be Tony, the guy who made him, and it's so messy. And I love the individual character bits, and Thor does get shafted throughout the entirety entirety of Phase 2, but I'm looking at the times now, and I'm just shocked that Quicksilver's got 26 minutes.
He's got less lines, but he's in it more than Wanda is. It's a weird little thing. You didn't believe me when I said those times, did you?
I did believe you.
Also, in my head, I think Tony's in it more than Cap, but 5 minutes less.
Tony's one of those ones where, like, how much of Robert Downey's scenes were just done on, like, a green screen, because so much of this movie is just him just kind of, like, staring at the camera. Like, it feels he's doing that so much more than any other movie.
Well, as he ages, and he famously hurt himself making Iron Man 3, I feel that is the shortcut way of keeping him active, is having him be way more in the suit or just quipping. So it definitely does feel that way. And, like, you know, you do see stuff like Jarvis Sentry Mode or whatever. Kind of want to, like, take the good with the bad. So, you know, it sucks that Joss has bounced. It's given rise to the Russos, who clearly have a very good vision for everything, and to Marcus and McFeely. It's allowed them to become the new architects, and I think that group has done really good work so far, but I will miss Joss's contributions to Marvel.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, because obviously Joss came in and he was immediately kind of grappling with a lot of characters and juggling them from the get-go, whereas the Russos got a solo movie with some more Avengers in it than normal, and then they got a second solo movie that, for all intents and purposes, is an Avengers movie, but really it's a two-hander between Tony and Cap. The extended Avengers scene is in Act 2, and it's over and done with in about 20 minutes. They're servicing all the Avengers, but they're definitely not doing it to the level of this movie, where there are 9 characters vying for screen time the entirety of this movie, and whereas in Civil War they only have to really kind of, like, deal with 2 people.
It's like a Cap and Tony story with, I guess, Bucky and Black Panther thrown in, and then everyone else is just there for a big fight scene.
Yeah. Part of it, I feel, is Joss having to atone for stuff he felt was wrong with Avengers, because you see with Hawkeye getting so much more to do in this movie. He's basically going, I'm sorry, Jeremy Renner. Yep. please accept this apology by having multiple moments where you get to prove yourself as an actor, and making him far more quippy. And I like the role they kind of position Hawkeye into in this one, of kind of like the Harry dad, which continues into Civil War.
Yeah. They bag on him, like, openly. I really like Black Widow's line of pretending that we need this guy really bonds the team or whatever. That's all very good stuff. And then, like, they turn that round and make it a poignant moment when we meet his wife, Linda Cardinelli. She makes the point about, you know, they're gods and all this stuff, and he's like, you're saying they don't need me, and she's like, no, I think they do, and that's what's more worrying. It's like, well, very, very poignant. And the apology line of Wanda's trying to do her stuff to everyone, make them see things, and as she approaches Hawkeye, he counters it and says, I did the mind control thing, not a fan. And I think that is 100% a line of apology to Jeremy Renner for spending most of his time acting in the first film not as the character he signed up for.
Yeah. Of these kind of characters, who do you think comes off the best?
I don't want to run down the whole cast because there's so fucking many of them. Like, we will give time to the newbies, but, you know, you look at Chris Evans and Chris Hemsworth, they're kind of just spinning their wheels. Like, they do some stuff with Ruffalo that ties in with Johansson. She's, like, fine. I think it's a step down from Avengers 1. I think it might be better than what they were doing in Winter Soldier, but, you know, a lot of people don't like their little romance, and we will discuss it. Hawkeye comes across much better. I like a lot of what happens with Tony in terms of, like, his accountability and the evolution of his character. But in terms of just, like, our performance, I think it's Black Widow and Hawkeye for me in this one.
Yeah, I think this is Ruffalo's most rounded performance, because he gets to do a lot as both Hulk and as Banner. There were Hulk moments in the first Avengers movie, but this feels like the first proper kind of, like, Hulk showcase moment.
Yeah, they did cute stuff, they did funny stuff, they did the brief horror show, but it was a giant tease. But now that you've seen Hulk, they can hit the ground running straight away, and you see the full spectrum of Hulk here. I really love him, like, on the floor shaking after having been Hulk, and, like, trying to listen to opera to calm himself down and all this sort of stuff. He does an incredible job of showing that pain.
Yeah, it's also one of the things is Hulk is one of those very hard characters to kind of nail down for this kind of thing, because the audience is there to see the big green guy smash some stuff.
Yes.
But I think these movies do a really good job of actually making you care about Banner, and I'm at the point now with these movies where I'm excited to see Banner as much as I am to see Hulk.
Oh, definitely. Ruffalo absolutely crushes that is the big difference. Like, Ed Norton seems to just be playing our character, and then he's also the Hulk. But because the Hulk looks like Mark Ruffalo because of the technology, and because he's motion capturing it and he's doing some of the voice, and he's just so good. From his first scene, he's been so good. Like, you really do connect with both sides of that character, and I love the way it's simple things like the other guy and him, and saying things like Code Green, just stuff like that. They do a really good job of portraying that it's two personalities thing.
Yeah, and he's got chemistry with most of the cast. He's got great chemistry with Downey Jr. He's got great chemistry with Scarlett Johansson. They don't show it in this one, but he's got chemistry with Chris Hemsworth as well, and that's what makes it exciting, is that they have someone who they can fall back on, but they've also got someone who can do the physicality of it, and then you completely believe is going to completely destroy an African city.
Wakanda, as Joss calls it. Do you want to just talk about Bruce and Natasha as we're on this?
Yeah.
It's something that a lot of people cite as a sin, almost, like a huge black mark on what Marvel have done. I personally have zero problem with it whatsoever. I think the chemistry those two have in the first film means you kind of have to do this. Like, if you're not going to do Cap and Natasha, I wonder if just people just desperately wanted Clint and Natasha to be together based on the first one and like their little moments and talking about Budapest and all that. But that would mean losing the farm and the big reveal with Hawkeye's family, so fuck that. I don't know, maybe it's in the execution, because I certainly like it early on, like the intimacy of her calming down the Hulk. It's a very intimate thing, and the characters are very similar, or the way they're written is very similar, like with their backgrounds of haunting, painful moments and everything. And just the chemistry in that bar scene, or at the party when she's playing bartender, and the ease with which Scarlett Johansson slips into that, like, fella done me wrong, like, that is so, like, in her wheelhouse, it's outrageous. So I actually really like it. The scene on the farm where, like, Bruce has just gotten out the shower and it turns way up from, like, a flirtation to them openly discussing, let's run away and be a couple, and, like, all of this, like, it does seem a bit of a rapid escalation, but overall I have no problem with this little plot line anyway.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like, I think they looked at the chemistry that the two of them had in the Avengers and then did an intelligent plot decision based off of that. They had that first scene together. I mean, Hulk and Black Widow have the most scenes together in Avengers. It's a logical choice for two actors that have pretty good chemistry together, and I have no issues with it up until kind of the conclusion of what happens. And it's nothing to do with, like, them having chemistry. It's just kind of decisions they do with Black Widow's character. So to talk about one of the most problematic things about this script,
Did you think you were the only monster on the team?
Yeah, it's that line, and I can see why people have an issue with that line for implying that people who are infertile, people who are forcibly chemically castrated, are less than.
Yes, because we get this reveal that in Black Widow's past, as her graduation ceremony of secret KGB spy school, she was sterilized because a child would be something you would care about more than your mission, and this is something that haunts her, and her playing of that moment is phenomenal. Like, the way she kind of shrugs it off, like, it's efficient, and, like, trying to smile, but also with tears in her eyes. I think she plays that moment beautifully, but the phrasing of what follows is very difficult. I think his intent was, them doing that made me this killing machine, and for that reason I'm a monster. But the way it sounds is, I'm a monster because I am infertile.
Yeah, that's where the issue is I think I get the intent. The execution was sloppy. She definitely thinks of herself as a monster, and I like that as a character beat, is that she regrets that she is doing all this stuff and she's trying to atone for it all now, and that's why she's on the Avengers team.
Yeah, because it's all been hints. Like, we still don't know the things she's done, and it could be, like, absolutely horrific.
So I think they dropped the ball there. I still like the chemistry, and I think Scarlett Johansson does the delivery really, really well. But then the next scene is, or close to the next scene with her, is them attacking Ultron, trying to get the casket or whatever it is away from him, and then she just gets kidnapped.
Yes, I'm not a fan of her getting kidnapped. Also not a fan of how little fucks they give that she got kidnapped. It's like, oh, she'll be fine. It's like, will she?
And also how little fucks they give about she's free in about 10 minutes. And it's like, did you have to do this?
It's really weird. I really don't see the point in it. Ultron, like, shows off his new body, but that wasn't... She didn't need to be captured for that to be achieved. He doesn't do anything to her. He just leaves her in a cell that Bruce, of all people, sneaks into with no aid whatsoever.
Was that she's pregnant, so we need to figure out some kind of way to...
That is a thing. You know, this chaotic production. Scarlett Johansson was pregnant in the production of this. They tried to film as many of her scenes before she was showing as possible, but towards the end they're having to use doubles and hide her and stuff. Fun fact, those doubles were so convincing that Chris Evans sat down and had a conversation with one of them and didn't realise it wasn't her for about 2 minutes. So that's fun stuff. Yeah, I really don't know. That's a bad 2 minutes of the film there.
Joss is to be credited with rehabilitating Black Widow from a disappointing first outing, and he still has written the best Black Widow stuff that we've seen in the MCU,
and he writes a hell of a banner too.
Yeah, but the fact that we get to this movie and we still haven't had a solo movie, and there's still no solo movie announced since then, it kind of leaves this bad taste in your mouth that this is almost where we've left her as a character. She's in Civil War, but she's definitely not the focal point, and she gets some good beats in that, but this is the last time that we get...
I feel that's always her character. It's like, you're not the focus, but we'll do whatever the fuck we can to give you beats to try and have you steal the show, and she's just a trooper that just fucking acts her ass off and out of nowhere pulls these great performances. But, you know, we'll see her backstory when Jennifer Lawrence's Red Sparrow comes out. But, cheap. And it ends in a lovely way with Hulk flying off in the jet and her talking to him. And when they reused that exact dialogue for Thor Ragnarok, I was like, oh shit, I didn't see this coming. Wow, thanks guys.
What do you think he does at the end? Because they don't explain it in Thor Ragnarok what they actually find in the ocean at the end of this movie, do they?
No, they don't.
Is it just he's thrown a little bit of the Quinjet out the back and they've gotten confused? Because he's managed to take the Quinjet into space.
Yes, he has, with the back missing. I mean, he's Hulk. He doesn't need to breathe, does he? I don't know. I really don't know how the Hulk works. Like, when he's getting punched to pacify him, it's like, surely this is the opposite of what... Like, surely the Hulkbuster should be a giant, like, cuddle party. Like, how is this helping? I don't know. He ends up in space somehow. So, to talk about something positive for a moment before we arc back to something less positive, I will say this movie does a lot of good stuff with world building and continuity. Continuity is something Marvel are criticised for. This has quite a lot. So the beginning scene, which is dope, by the way, and we'll talk about it, they are attacking seemingly the last Hydra base to get Loki's scepter back. And I believe Coulson, who they don't know is alive, discovered its location in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and told Maria Hill, and that's how they know about it. I believe he also had a hand in restoring that helicarrier that arrives at the end. I'm not sure about that.
I think it's like a plot of an episode of Age of Ultron where it's in a warehouse somewhere and they've got to, like, get it out. I mean, I can barely remember. Like,
well, still, fun little connective universe stuff. I really like that first scene, and I like how Avengers is now a brand because S.H.I.E.L.D. is gone. So, like, Cap's uniform has little A's on it and stuff like that instead of just the stars, and how Tony is running and bankrolling this Avengers operation with Maria Hill sort of heading up the support side of it. Starting the film in the middle of a mission and sort of giving you the money shot of all of the team doing something at once, which you had to wait until the end of the first film for, is a really, really, really good idea. And it gives this impression they've been doing this for a while now. They're a cohesive unit. They're very good at what they do. They completely overwhelm Hydra. Cap throws a bike at someone, and that's pretty fucking badass. I think that scene is really, really fun, and it is good to join in progress, because it's not just, you know, the Avengers did that one thing in the first movie, and then they didn't do anything until now. No, they have been a team, they've been doing shit.
One of those things where it's weird to watch it because you realise so much has happened since Winter Soldier. An awful lot has happened in the world of these movies since Winter Soldier ended, including Iron Man or Tony Stark deciding he needs to build himself a new iron suit and get inside it. After
he threw the arc reactor into the ocean, and he seemed like he was done, he blew up all his suits, but here he is with the Mark 45?
43.
Ugh.
Maybe it is the 45.
I think it's 43 at the beginning, Hulkbuster's 44, and then... Oh no, because they would have... It doesn't matter, this is nerdy shit.
This is probably the most egregious end of a movie and then ignoring it for the next one that they do. I remember Joss put a statement out at the end of Iron Man 3 and said, like, I watched this movie and I've got no idea how to come back from it. His solution was to just not. Tony is back in the suit. I text you when I was watching it, and there's a scene where Tony's flying around and you only see his face, and he's like, oh, they're doing the whole remote control thing, and he's doing it from a distance, and that that's how they're going to get around him not being in the suit.
Out he pops.
He climbs out of it and does some like Tony Stark King stuff in the building. It's like, I feel like you could have done that without changing much. Like, you could have done that as a carryover. Like, you finish off this really good opening set piece action scene that shows off everyone in just the right way, and they do the like nice tracking shot across all the wilderness and introduces the new characters really well. And then you could carry on the kind of the PTSD Tony Stark storyline, and
they do in a way, and that is a topic I want to talk about. But yes, this is a massive middle finger at continuity, as I'm talking about how good the continuity is. Tony back in a suit with nothing addressing that is a big red flag, but it is what it is. They build the world out. I like the way they use terms like an enhanced to talk about these people with superhuman abilities when they meet the twins, who we will talk about, I promise.
I feel like they use it a bit too much, though. It's like, I remember the copyright came out and they were just like, this is how they're going to get around not having mutants, and then
they call them miracles in Winter Soldier, don't they? I like that they have terminology because it suggests that they've been through some weird shit and it's every day for them. It's like, oh, here's another person with superhuman ability. And the code green thing that Banner had, the little, the sky's getting low, lullaby, all of that I think is a good way of sort of showing this team is on their shit.
It's all nice shorthand as well. Yeah. Like, it's fairly self-explanatory when they say it and it makes sense. It's not like there's no convoluted backstory that they feel the need to explain. It's just, these are matter-of-fact things that we have in this world. It keeps the pace quick even when there are other things that grind the pace to a halt.
This movie does set up a ton of future movies and developments. So Wakanda is mentioned. We meet Ulysses Claw, played by Andy Serkis. Vibranium is very much in it. It's a pretty big plot point of the film. And Black Panther is years away at this point. So that's quite a dangling thread. Like, expecting audiences to remember Claw from this. Or Clow, as Joss Whedeon calls him.
Although I do think at this point Black Panther was considerably closer than it actually turned out to be.
Yes.
Spider-Man got in the way.
Fucking Spider-Man, the greatest superhero ever made. Ragnarok, Thor has his visions. Hulk gets in the jet at the end. Infinity War, we get 4 Infinity Stones confirmed / revealed in this movie. Thanos ends the movie by putting his hand in the gauntlet. Apparently that one in Thor was fake, as we will see confirmed later. Civil War, very obviously. Tony and Cap literally fight. We have the Sokovia Accords based on what happens in this movie. The movie ends with the New Avengers HQ and the New Avengers team, and Falcon is looking for Bucky, as we find out in the party scene. So it lays an awful lot of groundwork. Even if you don't remember this film because of reasons, it does do a lot to build the world and flesh and set them up to tell a more cohesive story as they go.
For as much as I've ripped on it for skipping over the end of Iron Man 3, they spend time dealing with the end of Winter Soldier in this movie. Mm-hmm. And the party scene is full of so many things of here are just these people hanging out and doing things.
Yeah, it's so fun seeing them all with their hair down and just Tony and Thor bickering about their girlfriends, and Don Cheadle, War Machine Rhodey, wandering around the party trying to impress people with his War Machine stories, and no one gives a shit. And then when they do, he's like, yeah.
And Falcon's there as well, and it's good because that scene alone makes this feel like a bigger world.
It's not just this is the team; it's everyone you've seen on screen exists, and they may just wander in. And in a perfect world where they can just call their entire pantheon of people up on a minute's notice and get them in to do a scene like this, it would be amazing, because it's the kind of thing you see in comics all the time, where it's just, they're all just hanging out. Don't worry about it. Yeah, and obviously them all trying to lift the hammer. It was amazing.
I love all the hammer stuff in this movie. As much as Thor gets kind of shifted to the side, I think every single thing of everyone else trying to figure out how the fuck the hammer works is so good, and such a good recurring joke. Yes. And the payoff to that discussion and the character that gets to wield it it's really good work. And it's why you like Joss Whedon, because in that one scene you find out so much about all the characters. Tony getting oh, 1 second, I'm going to go grab the glove so I can go do it, and then
and he's making erection jokes when Hawkeye can't lift it, and he's all, oh, I'm going to reinstate Prima Nocta when I'm in charge of Asgard. Very fun, cheeky stuff. And him and Rhodey both trying to lift it. Banner trying to fake everyone out was no one's buying it, and then I love that Black Widow she's like, oh, that's not a question I need to answer.
Yeah, and just the tiny movement it makes when Cap puts his hand on it. And
nice nod.
Chris Hemsworth's reaction is
no, nothing, not at all. No. He is so good at casual little things, as we will find out in many episodes' time. I love that, and the ultimate payoff with Vision, a character that's in the movie for less than 9 minutes, I think. A very, very good shorthand way of making you trust him when you just met him. Right, well, this movie is called Age of Ultron. We should probably talk about Ultron, and while we do it, we're talking about Tony Stark's sort of arc in the movie, because he obviously creates him, and Ultron has a semblance of his personality, so I think the two go hand in hand. So we have James Spader, the one and only choice to be Ultron. They offered him this. He said, I don't just want to do voice work, I want to do a performance. Luckily for you, Mr. Spader, technology is such that you can do that. And he did, in a very tight suit, wearing a thing that's like 3 feet above his head to show where his eyes would be. He is amazing as the voice. I know audience reaction to Ultron is mixed, but I think objectively that vocal performance by him is amazing, because he has a one-of-a-kind voice. It's this deep, somber, serious voice that makes you pay attention, but then he can also slip and do something wacky. He can give the outbursts of rage. And I think his, in a bubble, forget the writing, forget the plot, his performance as Ultron, I think, is absolutely phenomenal.
Oh yeah, James Spader is so perfectly cast as this. All of my issues with it are, it's a Joss Whedon villain in a character that doesn't necessarily work as a Joss Whedon villain, which is weird to say, because I love Joss Whedon villains, and Loki isn't really a Joss Whedon villain in a lot of ways. Like, he does things that Joss Whedon villains do, but he feels so much more menacing. And that's not to say that Ultron isn't menacing, but Ultron feels simultaneously a bit too quippy. It's almost like in my head, he's downloaded 4chan into his head or something. and that's kind of like where he's at, is he's kind of that toxic masculinity, petulant child kind of thing. And I like that as an interpretation of the character, but there's something about it that makes Ultron feel more human than I necessarily want him to.
I think that's entirely what Joss was going for, in that this isn't just your typical robot that is being hyper-logical and has decided to destroy humanity and is a cold machine. He wanted Ultron to feel like an individual, a mad individual, like a crazy robot, not a robot that's malfunctioning, a personality that is sentient and is fundamentally disturbed. And I think there are times where his reactions are so close to human, it almost breaks it. Like the way he stands when he's listening while the twins talk, and you can just perfectly imagine, you can see James Spader the way he stands. Like his run as Robert California on The Office, which I watched recently, and then I watched this, so that was a wonderful thing. There are those moments where he's a little bit too human, but I think it does go a long way to have him rise above the standard, very rote robot character.
The one delivery that I always come back to is when Scarlet Witch asks him whether or not he's going to destroy the Avengers, and he talks about his aims are so much bigger than that, and then he walks off and then kind of turns around and goes also, yeah, and it's such a Joss Whedon line, but I can't tell whether or not it's because it's coming out of Ultron, because it's James Spader's delivery, which part of it doesn't totally work for me, but there's just something in it that I'm just I love the speech up until that point, and then the Joss Whedon quip kind of took me out of it.
I like the stuff with the rage when he meets Claw, and just the very mention of Tony Stark's name. He's angry, and then he takes it to another level. He holds the anger. You think it's just going to be him shouting, but he's like, why would you bring that up? Why? Don't compare me. And then he cuts his arm off to Tony Stark, and then he's like, oh, I'm sure that'll be fine. Are you okay?
And that's the other thing, is that they build up this he hates Tony so much relationship between the two of them. Tony and Ultron have the fight on the boat after that, and Vision says to him as they're leaving for the final battle, you're the one he hates the most.
Yes.
And there's zero payoff.
That's true, because they just shift it to the whole team has to fight. Yeah, Tony is never fully held accountable for this. I appreciate not making the world revolve around Tony Stark, despite his wishes. In theory, Ultron is Tony Stark.
He's a mapping of an Infinity Stone
put
onto a computer program that Tony Stark made.
Yes.
So he is Jarvis plus Infinity Stone, or Jarvis 2.0 with Infinity Stone, and he is the child of Tony Stark. And it's one of the, in some ways, should they have just got Downey Jr. to do this? And do
maybe, but I can't imagine a world where James Spader isn't blowing us all away. I like this idea that he's obsessed with a singular body, even though he possesses this sort of hive mind ability. And I think it is somewhat consistent with the Ultron character from the comics, where even though he is so much more, he does keep coming back to wanting to build and upgrade a better singular body.
Yeah, Ultron's plan is great. I like the idea of Ultron, I'm going to become perfect and rule, essentially.
And evolve.
And then when that doesn't work and the Avengers take it away from him, he's just like, fuck it, burn it all to the ground.
Yeah, his performance there, where it's like, you took my dream from me. And I was like, oh god, and now I want to kill everything. It's like, oh Jesus, man. To bring it back to Tony, I find the way he's gotten to this conclusion really fascinating and a great continuation of everything we've seen from him so far. It is a perfect evolution of his constantly tinkering to make more suits in Iron Man 3. He uses the phrase to put a suit of armor around the world.
He's gone from I'm going to protect me and my own to I'm going to protect everyone.
Yes, and we've talked about this, the dangerous part of his personality, that his obsessive nature, this is where that leads. He is meddling too much. He is trying so hard to do good that he is becoming evil in a way. And Cap says the thing about every single time someone tries to stop a war before it starts, bad things happen. That fully sets up their conflict. And you get this sense that even though these two have learned to work together, and Thor as well, they've all learned to coexist because they're on the same page, but there is still this personality clash that will not go away, in that Tony is a control freak and he doesn't answer to higher powers. And he doesn't really respect anyone but himself. Well, I don't know if he doesn't respect anyone but himself, but he respects himself significantly more than he respects other people.
Yeah, he tells Bruce, we're going to do this in 3 days and we're not going to tell anyone else. I don't want to take it to the village council or whatever, or however he phrases it. He knows he'll be shouted down and told he's wrong, and he's like, no, I'm going to do this because I feel that this is the best way to go.
Yeah. And it's very interesting because it's almost the opposite stance he has in Civil War, where he is acting without consulting others and he's going out there and for the good of the world. And I guess his plan in Civil War is for the good of the world, but it's just interesting seeing the way this character tries to make adjustments to being good.
Yeah,
he can't quite get it right.
But I can see the Tony from Civil War reacting to what happens in this movie, and I really like the reaction to this movie that goes on. I just wish there was more time to pay it off in this movie.
And he uses that word legacy, which you're probably sick of me saying whenever we talk about Tony Stark, but I mean, it's right there. It's a layup. It's Tony's legacy of what he has made, and he has become an inventor of something that will destroy others. And Ultron talks about that. People create the thing that will destroy them, and that is all very good stuff. And it's all built on this quote he gives of peace in our time, which, if it's a coincidence, it's a crazy one, but it seems like a nod to a Neville Chamberlain quote. He famously got back from negotiations with Adolf Hitler and said, yes, our negotiations, our talks will bring peace in our time, and a year later World War II breaks out. That seems a very deliberate thing to do, and it's a thing that Ultron quotes, peace in our time. So for whatever the bad stuff with Ultron, I do think the way Tony reaches this conclusion makes perfect sense from the journey he's been on, and it will lead him to his next attempt at this in Civil War. And I think that the way that Ultron responds to Tony and quotes him back to him and hates him and all this stuff, I think all of that's good. My problem predominantly with Ultron is there's a lot of why is he doing what he's doing. I get his overall plans, but there's just a level of mystery to he went and killed Strucker, he stole the scepter, he's gone and got some vibranium, now he's in Korea. It's and there's a lot of just the Avengers projecting his motives onto him and assigning him some behaviours and saying things like, oh, he'd rub our base in it and he's calling us out, and it just doesn't ring true. And they don't make anywhere near a big enough deal of the fact that Jarvis is blocking him from firing nukes, because the first thing is, right, he's in the internet, he's going to get nukes, he's going to kill us all, and they don't seem very concerned by that. Well, they're concerned, obviously, but it's treated as well, we'll just have to hope that doesn't happen and we'll try and fight this guy. It's just too many loose threads in that aspect for me.
Ultron is off-screen for so much of this movie because there's so many characters, they can't really spend much time with his machinations, and I think it's a very just thing where he doesn't want to have the big long monologue about what he's doing and stuff like that, and a lot of the explanation of what he's doing is done in shorthand or done in kind of organic ways. But there's a reason why you get villains who monologue a lot in these kind of things. It's because you can't spend much time with the villain. You kind of have to have a point where they explain what their plan is, because
they have to do that very not realistic thing of saying everything everything on their mind.
I mean, you get to rip on it, but like either if you don't spend enough time with the villain, or if you don't do the inversion of the monologue trope very well, you get stuff like this, where what is Ultron's plan with the vibranium? Because he's got like 3 different things going on with it, and it's like, was he doing all 3 of these at once? Like, did he know he had enough, or did he decide to like kind of like spin it off? And the only thing that you feel like you come from is when he downloads the entire internet into his head, and that's when he decides that human beings are bad.
Yes.
It's like that's the closest they get to like an intelligent job. They're like, oh yeah, I would definitely tell why human beings are awful just by downloading the internet. And then from there, the movie doesn't spend any time with Ultron other than him posturing to the Avengers or to the twins.
I just don't think there's enough urgency. The way the story is set up, they need to stop him now. And it's kind of like, your move, Ultron. And I don't know, just something about all of that rings false. I'm also not entirely sure of the logic of him creating Vision and then Tony creating Vision afterwards, although that does continue to mirror their motives. It's like, particularly Tony. Ultron's plan was to make this new body that's got vibranium and has all these wonderful abilities, and I guess he was going to download himself into it, and this was going to be his new flawless body. They steal the body, and then Tony's plan is he's found Jarvis. Jarvis was in the internet hiding, thanks to him going to the internet, the Nexus, in a scene that is of 20 seconds and needed to be 2 minutes. His plan is to put Jarvis in this body, and it's like, fine, Jarvis is a more obedient AI, but this is literally what caused all of this, and that's what Cap calls him on, and that they say. But it's all just a little bit strange.
But then Thor comes in and then goes like,
why does Thor turn it on?
This is a good idea, electricity, and then Vision is alive. It's one of those things where, like, I think the fucked up family dynamic of Ultron and Vision and Hank Pym and stuff like that in the comic books would be really difficult and kind of hard to do without it being like a three-hander between the 3 of them. And obviously that would come at the cost of Cap and all the rest of it. But I think it's a far easier explanation than what happens in this movie, where it's more Tony and his 2 children as opposed to a kind of like grandfatherly generational type thing of the sins of the father coming back and whatnot, which it keeps revisiting. Whereas in this one, it's like Tony's got one good kid and one bad kid, and then the good kid kills the bad kid, and Tony drives off in a sports car.
Yes. So the good kid is the Vision, played by Paul Bettany, and a wonderfully like closing the loop bit of storytelling decision making here, because he's always voiced Jarvis, and he himself was surprised to get offered this part because he says if you play one role, you don't often get to play another in these built universes. Maybe he didn't know they were planning on literally putting Jarvis into Vision, but because the entire thing is a nice reimagining of Jarvis the butler into Jarvis the AI, and then turning Jarvis the AI into the Vision instead of the very confusing thing with brain patterns and everything. I think he's really, really good in his 9 minutes.
He has amazing eyes.
Yeah, he really does. It's not cold and calculating like an unfeeling machine, but he's just so contemplative. He considers everything they say, and he does a good job of making himself seem apart from, like, he's bemused by all of them, but not in a sinister way.
I love when he first wakes up and his first response is to like fly away, and like he crashes into Thor, and then he flies to the window and then just stops and just
sudden stop. His graceful movement is always great. It's so cute when he grows the cape to mimic Thor, and just the 2 of them standing there with their capes billowing in the wind. Just really good little things of him assessing their characters, and I can't remember if it's Banner or Tony says something like, you know, if you don't do this, Will, and he's like, you'll what? And it's sort of like, you can't really stop me, but I'm very interested to see what your answer is. Yeah. And you get the really great moment of he hits Ultron with the hammer, and he's like, it's terribly well balanced. And then Chris Hemsworth gets to do Chris Hemsworth things and say, you know, if there's too much weight, you lose power on the swing. Just these great team-building moments.
Vision is probably the most profoundly weird thing that any of these movies have done so far. Like, Guardians of the Galaxy gets away with it because it's its own self-contained universe, and Thor has kind of kept grounded in standard fantasy tropes up till this point. But Vision he's a purple man who's grown inside a tube, who has a stone, which is like the most important MacGuffin that the Marvel Universe have like set out so far embedded in his forehead.
He can move through walls and floors and change his mass. He doesn't do it in this one, does he?
He doesn't, but they make no move to explain what his powers are.
No, or how vibranium makes that possible.
Yeah, but he like meld into people and shoot a giant laser beam out of his head.
Yeah, I wonder if that is, because I don't feel many people talk about Vision, but I wonder if it's just so much so soon and it's such a step above everything we've seen so far in terms of his power set.
Yeah, like, it's just because he hasn't had a solo movie, and because his power set
never probably will,
and because his power set is so hard to define. Like, his power set is hard to define than Scarlet Witch, who in this movie they just say is
she's
weird.
Yeah. He's fast and she's weird.
Yeah, that's the thing, is like, they introduce these... There's two characters in this movie who they introduce who aren't... He can shoot bows, she can fire guns, in the way that Black Widow and Hawkeye are in the first Avengers.
Yes,
where...
Joss talked about how everyone so far has had very punchy powers.
Yeah, and then these two are just... Like, how do you explain this to someone? Like, obviously they have, and that's astounding that Marvel have managed to explain these two characters to a mass market who are eager to see them in more movies. And
I still barely get how Vision works, and I've read comics that he's in. The one by... Is it Tom King?
Yes.
Yes, that should be adapted as a miniseries immediately. That thing is fucking great. I think we have to talk about the twins. Joining our cast as team members, we have Elizabeth Olsen as the Scarlet Witch. Yes, sister of Mary-Kate and Ashley. We have Aaron Taylor-Johnson as Quicksilver. I've always hated Aaron Taylor-Johnson, and I really don't know why. I think he's a dick in real life, and I sort of can't not think of him as a dick when I see him and stuff. I think their bond together is really good, and I think she has grown into this role. But they're both a little bit flawed. The accents... I don't think she's good at the accent, and I think his, while it's better, it's so strong it's almost comical. And, like, on some level... Like, it's good to have some international flavour in there, but on some level, if they can't land on an accent that's good, they should probably have just been American. They took the role together. They'd just come off making Godzilla, where they're a couple in that, and they play brother and sister here, and they, for funsies, injected a little bit of romantic tension, because that's hilarious. Thanks, Ultimate Universe. Yes. Saoirse Ronan was considered for Scarlet Witch, and I can't get out of a world where that happened, because she would have been great. Lindsay Lohan auditioned. That would have been great for a very different reason. I like her, like, ballet movements, the way she's very dancey when she makes her spells. I like the costuming for her. That sounds grosser than I meant it to be.
It's a very good adaptation of the comic costume.
Yeah,
like in the comics,
ridiculous.
Yeah, like in the comics, it's this kind of big, red, leathery, very like comic booky costume. Whereas in this, it's a red leather jacket that she picks up from the Avengers headquarters. Like, it's a lot of subtle reds and blacks, and it does work. Again, like the costuming in this movie, the only one that is weird is Quicksilver, where it's a pretty literal adaptation of his costume, but it's just stuff that he owns.
And it's a good thing that Tony had shoes that would fit him and a locker for him when he joins the team.
With the logo facing the camera as well, if I recall.
Of course, Adidas. I think she's better than him, even though he's a better actor than her. Just because, I don't know, just the accent, and he's got so few lines, and he repeats one of them, and I don't know. He was very hesitant to take the role. It took a year of convincing, because he was very hesitant about, the long-term ramifications of being in Marvel movies and how long they have you for. Problem solved. He has got the honour of thus far being the only death that sticks of a sort of major character. I wonder if his hesitance led to that, or if it's just a coincidence. And because I think Joss always wanted to kill someone in this movie.
Yeah, I think it was a coin flip. It was either going to be one of the newbies or it was going to be Hawkeye.
Well, they sell it as Hawkeye the whole way through. It's set up to be Hawkeye, because he keeps saying so many things about, oh, this is my last mission, and after this we'll do that, and they talk about his vulnerability and how important he is, and this is my job, and oh, you'll be safe now, and stuff like that. Someone says while he's on screen,
and he goes back to save the kid, and they do all the dramatic shots of it and everything. And I like his art. He starts off as that kind of like the petulant kid. They get the villain monologue almost. Well, not the villain monologue, but like the monologue explaining their backstory, which makes them so much more sympathetic than Ultron. Like in terms of we spent 2 days waiting to die
waiting for Tony Stark to kill us.
Yeah, like that's such a...
And when she says Stark and her eyes light up red, it's like, oh man.
And again, it's so good, and such a fantastic kind of Joss monologue that explains so much about characters, and the movie doesn't pay off Tony.
Nope. Tony gets away with everything and then gets to be the one telling other people off.
It's so weird, because I love that speech, and I love the implications, and I love what they set up with it and everything like that, but they don't pay it off. They just start working with him because they realise that Ultron's the bigger threat. There's no headbutting, and there's no headbutting after this because Tony leaves the team, so Scarlet Witch doesn't have to be face to face with him. And
Cap is always sympathetic of them in every single one of his lines, and he says like one mean thing to them as they join up, but yeah, he was always sympathetic to them, and then they all agree Ultron needs to be stopped while Tony's basically trying to make a new Ultron.
But like, you get that line of Cap entering the lift and talking to Maria Hill, and she's just like,
oh, well, he's like, oh, someone's signing up for a German scientist to mess around with them. Who would do that?
Like like that. They want to do it because they're at war. We're not at war, but they are. And there's so many good little character beats for these two. And I think a lot of it is kind of done off screen and done for them by other characters' reactions to them. But getting back to my original point of like where Quicksilver starts as being like the petulant kid who wants to take down Tony Stark to ultimately being the hero who saves a child's life.
You didn't see that coming. Repeating that line of when he takes Hawkeye out at the beginning and says, "Oh, you didn't see that coming?" The only scene of his I really actually like is when he catches the hammer. Thor throws a hammer, he's running. It's similar to what we saw in Days of Future Past where he's seemingly moving. Everything's in slow motion. He's like, "Oh, just grab this," and then he goes flying because he's not worthy. Yeah. But everything else with him, I don't know. Maybe it's just my unabashed hatred of this actor. But I prefer her, even though, I don't know, I like the role. Maybe it's just I like the character and I like the aesthetic and I like the spells. But
yeah, she gets the better power showcase as well. I really like the kind of three-way relationship between them and Hawkeye. Like, I don't think there's not enough time spent on it, but like Hawkeye's reactions to Quicksilver are good. Like, I really like when he knocks the arrow and is just like, no one will know.
Entirely improvised by Jeremy Renner.
It's a good moment because like there's a nice antagonistic relationship between the two of them that like builds up the course of the movie, but then he also gets to go in the room and goes, "This is my job.
We're fighting robots and I've got a bow and arrow. All of this is ridiculous."
Yeah, and then she comes out and she's casting the spells and you get to see her turn one of the robots on one of the other ones and explode them. And
I really love when she senses Quicksilver's dead and the sound goes and she screams and just all the Ultrons in the room are gone. It doesn't make a huge amount of sense that she rips a quote-unquote heart out of Ultron's chest, but that she gets that little moment and that he, to the end, is like concerned for her long-term safety or whatever because they had this brief partnership. And I really like that he says, "You and I, talking to Quicksilver, will hurt them, but you will destroy them because of what she does." And I think we need to talk about that because she is able to get into their heads and implant these. They're careful not to call them visions because there's a character called the Vision, but, well, they're visions. And it starts right at the beginning, and the one that they don't all know about, which surely should have been raised more, but Tony, while he's investigating the Hydra lab, she sneaks up and puts this vision in his head of all the Avengers are dead, and it's sort of in space, and I wonder if this scene will be recreated for Infinity War, maybe the last shot in the film or something, I don't know. And that is what drives Tony on throughout this, in that he says he felt them all dead and it was his fault. While the other characters all know that this was done to them by Scarlet Witch, I'm not sure he knows that she did this to him because he just experiences it and they quietly sneak off and let him take the scepter and move things forward. But the main three are, I'm going to do these in order of least interesting to most. So Thor is in Asgard, it's a big revelry thing. Idris Elba, furious at being summoned to film this because Tom Hiddleston had a scene in the film, then he wasn't available, so they had Idris do it, and then Tom Hiddleston was available, so they also had him do it, but they cut it. I don't know. Thor just gets some confusing, like, you could stop this type stuff.
It could be set up for Thor Ragnarok, but it's probably not set up for Thor Ragnarok. No. And then it turns into an info dump that isn't really an info dump because they don't actually dump any info on you. They just show some Infinity Stones and pictures of stuff from past movies.
He just sees his vision slower because, like, we see these quick flashes of the stones and you see Vision's eyes and stuff like that. And then when he goes to his magic paddling pool, he gets to see it slower and he understands. So Joss wrote it as he was going to be possessed by a Norn, and Selvig would be interviewing the Norn, essentially, about what's going on. And while this movie is long and full of weird shit, that might have been another long, weird thing. Probably would have been better than what we get. Natasha, we get creepy horror movie background into her in the spy school with the ballerinas and the piano and her learning to murder people, and there's subtle things like the characters are walking backwards just to make it seem a little bit weird, and she's being wheeled in a hospital bed down a corridor, and it's all very creepy, and they just will cock tease us with the background of the Black Widow, and we will just never see it until we do.
And random Julie Delpy cameo.
Yes, as Madame B or something.
I really like the kind of like teasing they do. There's not, again, the fact that this is all we have of Black Widow's backstory is frustrating to say the least. But I like what little we get. I love the scene where she's doing target practice and she's changing the gun between hands, and it's like
and she goes from shooting a target to shooting a man, and
yeah,
like, oh shit. Very Jason Bourne. And then faking failing an exercise so she doesn't have to be sterilised. It's like, Jesus. And we don't even know what that is at the time. We learn it much later, but maybe you can guess at it based on the way the scene is played. The one I like the most, Steve Rogers, is in a nice ballroom, a sort of the war's over party, and flashbulbs sound like bombshells to him, and he sees people getting stitched up, and it's all got this very...
There's the guy who spilt wine on himself, yes. And it looks like he's been shot, yes. And... Something
nice having this sour undertone. And when I first watched it, I saw it that way, in that, he's traumatized and he just, all this stuff haunts him. It's not that at all. It's that Cap is incapable of a life without war. Like, he was very much, almost literally built to go win the war, and his whole life was devoted to that. And it's why he throws himself into S.H.I.E.L.D. while the others attempt to live normal lives. And it's why he shrugs off all of Black Widow's attempts to needle him about, having a relationship. And Ultron even calls him on it. I think it's Ultron. He's like, you think you can be someone without a war or whatever. And it's when Peggy, Haley Atwell's back, they all just cameo the shit out of her because she's amazing. She asks him, imagine us having a normal life. And then he turns and the whole ballroom's empty. And there's nothing. And it's just such a good moment that it will then come back on the farm where he's looking in at this perfect domestic picture, and he can't do it. It's not him. He walks off and starts chopping wood like the big manly man he is. Very, very good scene. Very glad Haley Atwell's back.
Somehow it manages to pay off 3 movies worth of Cap stories in this one dream sequence with the kind of... and set him up on his new trajectory. Like, it pays off in the end with the scene with Tony and Cap talking about what they need to do, and Cap saying the man who would have wanted a family and domesticity died 75 years ago, or went into the ice 75 years ago. And again, it's one of those things where, like, this character beat is so good and such a strong fundamental understanding of Captain America and who he is in comparison to who he was, and it's kind of all we get of that in this movie.
And in some ways, like, the man that Peggy somewhat fell for doesn't exist anymore. He's wearing his face in a more muscular body that can only be at war. And this idea that he can't have a normal life is one that will keep coming up. I know Joss Whedon was not happy with his final line, but one of his final lines where Tony's like asking him, like, are you going to be okay? And he's like, oh, I'm home. And he was like, this sounds too much like he's happy, and it's meant to be more of a sad thing where it's like, this is all I can do.
Is the implication there that this is the site of the army base that he got trained on?
I'd never considered that.
Because in the background, I feel like you can hear people training, because it's in upstate New Jersey, which I feel is, or upstate New York, which I feel is the location of where that base was. It might have been in New Jersey, so not upstate New York.
It was New Jersey. I don't know. I think it's just meant to be, a world where I'm training soldiers and preparing for war and stuff. That's the only place Cap is capable of being comfortable.
It's sad.
It's a very sad character. So I mentioned the farm many, many times, but most recently that Cap looks in and it's something he can never have. This farm thing is wonderful. They were originally trying to give the impression that Hawkeye might secretly still be evil from the first film, like still hypnotized, because he's very secretive. He says he doesn't have a girlfriend, and then he's having a secret phone call, and then it's like, oh, who's that? Oh, my girlfriend. And it's like, oh. And Joss was very concerned that people would think, they'd just immediately be like, oh, he's obviously talking to Nick Fury on the phone, so that he tweaked it a bit more. I didn't pick up on either of these ideas until I heard Joss talking about them on the commentary.
I didn't pick up on either that he was evil or that he was talking to Nick Fury, but I definitely picked up on they
were doing something with him, like there was something going on. But...
yeah, I enjoyed the kind of like the twist, because it does come very quickly afterwards with the kind of like, I don't have a girlfriend, and then, oh, I'm talking to my girlfriend. That again is one of those like very Joss Whedon-y moments where you're kind of playing with your expectations, but like I'd never started to make in my head like decisions of who he was talking to.
No. As they are flying away from the big Hulk Iron Man fight scene where like they very negative perception of the Avengers and particularly Hulk, so they have to hide somewhere. Hawkeye's flying the jet. Tony says, where are we going? And he says, a safe house. Originally the line was like, where are you taking us? And he says, somewhere I hoped I'd never have to. And Joss changed it because he was like, well, no, because Tony would be like, get out of the chair, you maniac. But what we end up with is Hawkeye lands on this farm, and it turns out he's married with kids, which is an interesting beat to play for this guy, who they sort of cast as like a bit of a sap, who you would think would be unlucky in love. I love that Tony is like, this is an agent when he kisses his wife, and then the children come in, he's like, these are smaller agents. Just the farm, man. Just a lovely little moment that probably doesn't belong in a 2-hour action movie, but I'm so glad it's there.
Yeah, it's like the party scene, where it's so much longer than it needs to be, but says so much more about who these characters are, and does so much work to make me appreciate these characters than any single one of these movies has done. You get so much about Tony and Cap when they're outside chopping wood to compare penis sizes.
And then Cap rips a log in half.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means sexually, but I'm interested.
And
Sorry, go on.
Like... And like everything with Natasha knowing who this woman is and having a relationship with them.
Auntie Nat and everything. And when you learn that she can't have kids and like she's invested in the kid and wanting them to name it Nat and stuff, like, it's lovely and sad.
Yeah, it's lovely and sad, but then also like the fact that like when Laura Barton turns to her and goes, "Oh, it's not little Natasha, it's little Nathaniel," and then she kind of like bends down and goes traitor to her stomach. It's such a wonderful beat, and I love when these characters get to be domestic. And it's one of those the biggest issue with translating comic books into movies is that a comic book is monthly, and a comic book has time within 20 to 22 pages to have these down moments, whereas the superhero movie, like, we get 2 to 2.5 hours of these characters every 2 to 3 years, and there is so little time for this. And I love that Joss managed to carve out probably about 40 minutes of this movie just for kind of domestic downtime in between all the punching and exciting stuff. And
it's the scene on the helicarrier from the first film, but with even less. It's even safer. Like there's no hideous I mean, they're having some big conversations, and Cap and Tony are arguing, but it's far more civil than they are elsewhere. Like, it's just like a friendly disagreement, and they just go their separate ways a bit. It doesn't threaten to turn into fisticuffs or anything.
Yeah, he even gets them to have the scene where like they have fucking breakfast. Nick Fury shows up, talks Tony into the fact that he's a bit of an idiot, and then they're inside talking about what they're going to do with Ultron, and they're just eating breakfast at the time.
And Tony's playing darts, and Hawkeye gets a bullseye and just does that little, well, I am who I am thing.
It's full of so many wonderful moments, and if this movie was just the party scene and this scene and maybe like the Hulkbuster fight, I would be over the moon, because a lot of the kind of confusing stuff is kind of taken out. But that's why I kind of love this movie, because it's so messy, and the stuff that you cut out to make it a better quote-unquote movie is the stuff that makes me love it.
And like they kept Linda Cardellini a secret. Like, she was in none of the promotional stuff whatsoever. And then when this happens, and Hawkeye's the only one of them that gets to have this normal life, and they're all very alienated by it on some level. Like, Cap and Widow are so devoted to what they do. Hulk is so afraid of his own nature that he's always on the run. Tony is borderline autistic with his difficulties and with stuff. But Hawkeye has this to go home to, and them getting to be there, it's both nice for them and also like this big reminder of none of you have this. And it is why it seems so obvious that Hawkeye's gonna die. And I really love that in the middle of the final battle, Hawkeye and Widow are sort of driving to the next location, which is, by the way, is a bit weird on this flying island. They're just driving around it, and he's talking about interior decorating and stuff. It's just like such a nice little callback and everything. The farm is wonderful.
It is wonderful. I think when that Vanity Fair photo shoot came out a couple of months ago with like the build up to Infinity War, and they've got all these new shots of all the Avengers, and Linda Cardellini was one of the people that they'd got a photo of, I got so happy. And I don't think she's been confirmed for Infinity War 1 or 2 at this point, but
just so knowing that he goes home to her is nice though. Because, and that's another thing, he retires at the end of this movie, and you forget that because of course he shows up in Civil War, and of course he's going to be in Infinity War. And
they make a big point of him doing it in Civil War. It's just like, I'm retired and I'm here doing Cap a favour.
So really just some miscellaneous stuff from here. I think it's very cute that the Hulkbuster is called Veronica as a little Archie Comics joke. Banner loves Betty. Hulk's girlfriend would then be Veronica because she's the bad girl. I don't know. It's very cute though.
Can we talk about how excellent that fight is?
We can talk about that. Go to sleep. Go to sleep. Go to sleep.
I think of all the fights in this movie, it's the one that is the most egregious. It doesn't do anything to the plot. It's just Black Widow brainwashed Hulk, and Hulk goes on a rampage. It's the comic bookiest fight in this entire movie.
Well, people have wanted this from day, like, people have been demanding Hulkbuster armor for ages. I think they were disappointed that none of the hundreds of armors that are flying around in Iron Man 3 are the Hulkbuster, and Joss finally delivered it. And I'm not sure they do a great job of conveying the structure of the Hulkbuster, and that Tony is only in its torso, because, like, its arm gets fucked up, and you're like, oh, wait, shouldn't Tony's? No, of course, he's only small.
It's got that, like, compartmentalization thing where, like, the arm comes off because the Hulk's jammed a pipe through it, and then it's got that, like, moment of, like, he's charging up the thing, and then, like, guess they punch hands, and this is just me, like, talking about, like, cool moments in a fight, but this made me the happiest.
Yeah, I love when he knocks his tooth out and Hulk turns around and it's that quiet anger, and Robert Downey Jr. is almost cartoonish. I'm sorry. It's just right. It could have been way worse, but yeah.
Yeah. And it's weird because it comes after these, like, dark dream sequences, and it's almost like Joss knows that, like, okay, we've had the dark bit, and now we're going to have just kind of the ludicrously fun part. And also, interestingly, considering this movie was released in the wake of Man of Steel, every single fight in this movie that's done in a populated place, they make a point of saving people's lives.
Yeah.
Every single fight.
I'm a big fan that Hulk is the one to react to, like, everyone's looking at Hulk and afraid, and just before he gets knocked out, there's that moment where Hulk is looking around and you can see this rage monster is contemplative about it, but then he starts to roar and he was probably going to kill them all again. But like, that's a good decision, I think.
Yeah, because, like, it doesn't come at the cost of anything. It just adds more to the tension of there are people around who need to be saved, rather than there are buildings that we can crash into and they will look cool because CGI will make it look cool. Like the scene with the lift where Tony's trying to get people out of the lift, and then he, like, just uses it as a bludgeoning device to hit. It's the little bits like that make it feel more real and lived in. And then when they come back to it in Civil War, like, you go, like, of course there's going to be issues from this. Even though they are trying to save people, there are still going to be people who are like, this went badly.
Yes, it did. It was not good. And Banner says that thing about the world just saw the Hulk, like the real Hulk. Because, you know, his whole backstory of being on the run, it's like mysterious sightings of Yeti or whatever. Like, that's always the Hulk thing of crazy people see him, but he's not confirmed to be real.
Yeah, even the fight in Harlem was done at night.
Who knows? It was a testing thing. But yeah, this is very much... And I like that that's how Tony finds him. He Googles Hulk in the news, and then he goes there. Good fun stuff. Do you know what's not fun? I hate everything that happens in Korea. In real life and in this film.
South Korea's fine.
Yes, it is. The South Korea scenes, I think, are just so bland. Fun fact, though, there's a little scene where the Ultron drone's attached to a truck and make it fly. One man animated that for 360 days. By himself, and they threw him a party when he finished, and no one remembers that shot. It's not like he did Hulk getting punched or anything.
Fun fact for Matt, purely yes. Matt, an ex-co-worker of ours' wife is actually in the train sequence on that movie.
Wow. More just random fun little bits before we get into our closing stuff. We've gotten through this quicker than I thought. Before he chooses Friday, some of the other drives that are at Tony's disposal are, as we said, Jocasta and Tadashi of Big Hero 6. Like, that's fun, I think. By the way, so because Jarvis is now his own entity, and it would be weird to have another Jarvis, or I guess he doesn't exist for him to plug in. He needs a new little AI to talk to, and he has this Friday, as in, you know, your girl Friday, like a secretary type thing. And it's Kerry Condon from 3 Billboards. It's a bit weird that she's so Irish. Is she Irish in Civil War? I can't really remember. But
I feel like it takes a while for her to warm up to being Irish as well. The first few line readings, I'm just like, I can't tell what... And then eventually she's like, oh no, you are stunningly Irish.
Yeah. And I don't know, are we saying that Tony has a thing for the Irish accent? Is that the implication there? I don't know. But yes, Friday is here to stay. Probably the only, like, vocal performance that has been in a Marvel movie that a big deal isn't made out of. Because, you know, they're very public about James Spader and Josh Brolin and Paul Bettany, but this is just kind of like, don't worry about it.
It's especially weird because if you look at her CV, it's the only film role she had before being in 3 Billboards were Age of Ultron, Civil War, and Spider-Man Homecoming. Like, those were her 3 consecutive credits were this voice role in every single one of them.
Just you wait until she's Jocasta in a future movie in a very Paul Bettany way.
No, that'll be we all know who that'll be in relation to Spider-Man Homecoming.
I don't know what you make of the final fight scene. I guess we'll talk about that when we do the third act, but I do know in particular I like the shot where they're trying to protect this thing from being touched by all the Ultron drones, and it's just sweeping camera around them as they all just do fun shit.
Joss has got 3 of the most iconic kind of Avengers fight beats. Because he has the scene in Avengers where they do the circle around, which has become shorthand for "this is the Avengers." You know you're watching that movie when you see that circle shot around all of them outside Grand Central Station. And then you've obviously got the scene where they leap off the motorcycle and all the rest of it, and there's that kind of like shot from the sides as they're all leaping forward. And then there's this circle shot, which obviously is supposed to call back to that first one. But there's so much going on in that CGI fight scene. I'm sure if
it's a bit too busy. Like if you can identify cool moments, it's like, oh wow, but there's too much going on. Like that's why it's not as effective as the first time they did it. But anytime they do this and anytime they combine powers, so I like the opening scene as well, I dig it. But yeah, I do like that. Thanos at the end says, "Fine, I'll do it myself." And on the commentary, Joss Whedon talks about Loki failed and Ronan failed, so he'll have to do it himself. But is not the implication that Ultron was working for him somehow? And like, I know he had the stone before it became Ultron, but it seems a bit of a weird sort of juxtaposition to me.
Yeah, there's like 3 steps involved in this, because you've got Scarlet Witch cast a spell on Tony, which made him look at the stone and make Ultron.
Could Thanos have been whispering in Scarlet Witch's ear?
That's the weirdest point. I've got no fucking clue what Scarlet Witch was doing throughout most of the first third of this movie. She's supposed to be making people crazy, and there's the scene where she throws Cap down some stairs, and then she creepily walks to the door. Yeah. Walks back through a door that then closes.
Single weirdest shot in the film.
The door's closing afterwards. It's almost like, did you just like have her walk through some doors and then reverse the shot? Is that how you did that?
Why did you do that?
Why did you do that? But yeah, it's so weird is that it feels like they're building up to something with Scarlet Witch having like a plan, and she's like maneuvering people into places where she wants them to be. And then, no, they don't know that Ultron's inside the Infinity Stone, or they don't know that Tony's working on a secret robot military project or to protect the world. So it's so weird, and all works, and you don't think about it too much.
Yeah, because it's just, oh, he's putting on the gauntlet, and here we fucking go in the moment. But when you really pull at that thread, it's like, what?
Like, you could have just done Loki influenced Strucker when he was down on Earth, and Loki had some kind of influence over Hydra, and that's why he made
true, because they made the twins, didn't they?
Yeah. You could play that, and then this is what the plan is and stuff like that, but they make no effort to explain anything that goes on.
You know what? They might have done that, because there's talk of the Loki scene that got cut, because there was a main scene, and then they also, I think, tried to have him be in that dream sequence. They talked about they lost it because it gave the impression that Loki was controlling Ultron, and maybe that's exactly what it was, is that Loki guided the development of the twins to then guide the development of Ultron. I don't know, but
yeah, I mean, because that would at least in some way make it come full circle. And
well, maybe we will get a scene in Infinity War between Scarlet Witch and Thanos. Who knows? So, yeah, that's a pretty good assessment of this movie overall, but the way we like to close these out is to look at the 3 big things about what people say about these movies, and we start this off with Villain Watch. Criticism is always like, oh, the film's good, but the villain sucks. I personally like Ultron. I feel the general consensus is people don't like him. I think the twins provide something a bit different than just punching things. But I do know that, as we've agreed, generally villains work better when it's a human without a mask or a suit, and you can see their eyes, and the two characters can interact. And this is a big swarm of robots, and it's the ninja rule where, like, you know, one ninja is deadly, many ninjas are inept and there to get killed, and it's just a big swarm of like faceless things that don't matter. So I can see an argument for this not working, but I think of Ultron as one of my more favoured MCU villains. He's not in my top 3. He may not even be in the top 5, but I do like him.
I like Ultron. I think my issues are more the little asides just kind of grate a little bit, but like as a villain, I think he works, and I think I almost enjoy the sense of the swarm more in this movie than I do in Avengers. Because like in Avengers, everything still feels like it's focused on Loki. The entire fight is kind of revolving around that, and yes, they do start to get beaten up and everything, but this one it feels like they are working so hard, and there's so many of them, and
the sheer number. Who is it that calls them out? It might be Thor, I don't know, but they're like, you know, come on, and then suddenly all these Ultron drones start swarming towards them, and it's like, you had to ask or whatever.
Yeah, it's a good moment, and I do think it's sad that 2 of these Avengers movies end with pretty much the exact same fight sequence, and it does look like Infinity War is going to have something similar to this again based on the trailer, but at this point it feels like it's the only way. way. It's like there's so many of these people, and you can't have everyone fighting the main villains. You need to have multiple.
I mean, they've got a numbers advantage, so you have to take that away from them, and it is what it is. It's different, like they fought aliens, they fought evil businessmen, they fought like a god, and this is a big robot man, like a digital entity, and feels necessary. And again, I love James Spader's performance.
I think James Spader's performance is great. I think the actual plan is Machiavellian and big, but I think it works in a kind of very superhero soap opera way. Like it's the most superhero-y, comic booky villain plan that we've had so far. I'm gonna crash a giant fucking meteorite into the planet, and
I do like that little beat. He becomes obsessed with meteors, so he makes his own. It's like, Jesus, man. He's like an emo child with all this power.
It's one of those things where I like all the little individual parts. I'm just not sure if there's enough connective tissue to make it fully land.
That was my assessment at the beginning, and I think that holds true here, in that it's a series of wonderful moments that they have trouble connecting, and I think it's all really important to the overall MCU, but as a movie that has to try and live up to the first Avengers, and it is lacking, unfortunately. But the third act, we've had a little run of them where it's like, it's not as good as what came before, but it doesn't hurt it. I don't think this is a step down at all.
No, I think this movie is stunningly consistent throughout, in that all three acts are a total mess, and all three acts have fantastic material in them that I genuinely cannot say I think one act is better than the other, because this movie, there's so much going on, and it's almost like there's 6 acts to this movie.
Yeah, this is true. That's the thing. When we're talking about this, we're not talking about is the ending good. It's just, is there a noticeable drop-off that somewhat spoils the film? Because that's what people are talking about. It's like, the first 2/3 were good, but then it wasn't very good at the end. And I don't think that's the case here. It's not that this is one of the better endings or anything like that, but it's not that noticeable drop-off. As I said, my least favourite portion is the stuff in Korea, because it just felt personality-less and sterile.
I genuinely forget about that part every single time I watch this movie. Like, every time I watch it, I go, right, and now we're going to Sokovia for the final fight, and I'm like, oh no, we've got the entire bit with Vision's got to be born.
So for me, this is a step up from that bit. So if anything, it's a good third act with a bad 2/3 act. I don't know.
But it's not even a 2/3 act, because if we're saying that's Act 2, then it's the farm is also in that, which we love the farm.
5/6 act, I don't know.
The 6th act being 40 minutes long.
True. Oh man, with fun stuff and bad stuff and everything in between. Our final bit of business, we are trying to assess the all Marvel team of performances. We are trying to pick one performance from each movie. If we agree that there isn't anybody who is outstanding, we get to keep that pick and use it for a film that has more than one. Right now, we actually do not have anything spare. For The Dark World, we used that on Samuel L. Jackson. For Winter Soldier, we went with Chris Evans and Samuel L. Jackson. There is an argument to say nobody, so that we have a spare, because there are movies coming up that will need it. I did a little bit of jotting down. I don't think we do need to do that, so I'm going to fight really hard for James Spader here, because he's James fucking Spader. That voice is one of a kind. I think it's exactly like Mandarin, where regardless of how you feel about the impact on the plot and the execution and all that, in a bubble, as a piece of acting, this is great for me. This is as good a vocal performance from a celebrity actor as there is, and he's portraying him physically. Whether that is too much and making him not robotic enough, maybe, but I think he fucking knocks it out of the park. Everyone else in this is not doing anything better than they've done before, so for me, it's Spader or nobody.
Yeah, I don't think anyone in this movie is the best that they are at in this movie. I think some people are kind of running on autopilot. I think some people are given far too little to do. I think the only person who might actually be the best that they're at is Jeremy Renner.
Yeah.
Jeremy Renner's the only one that I would go, I think this is a noticeable bump up in performance, and he would be the person that I would probably fight for, because I do think that he completely nails his comedy beats, but then he's also given far too little. And I think James Spader is giving it his all in this performance. Yeah. I just don't think, as you say, there is such a profound villain problem with so many of these Marvel movies that there are 3 that I can think of as being great villain performances. And I think James Spader does a great performance. I just don't think he does a great villain performance.
Maybe not.
And I just don't think that what he's doing makes the movie better. I think it makes the movie more memorable, which isn't necessarily the same thing. And I would like to see Ultron come back. There's plenty of wiggle room for them to bring Ultron back.
Oh, absolutely. You assume that's the last one, but that's not necessarily the case.
But then we also don't see him destroy it. We just see a shot of some yellow light in the distance that might imply that Vision let him go. It's just, I struggle because I feel like Ultron should overwhelm this movie. Like, Ultron should feel like an omnipresent threat.
It is the age of Ultron.
But he doesn't, because he goes away and there are, as you said, like the farm scene happens and we don't get anything with Ultron for such a long stretch of it. Like, there isn't that sense of impending doom throughout all of it. Like, there's no sense of impending doom until we get to Sokovia and you realise, oh no, he's going to destroy the world. Ultron is just a petulant child. There's no payoff to the cyclical nature of the story that I keep coming back to with Tony. Instead, that's all given to Vision. And obviously that's not a reason to say that James Spader isn't doing his best performance, but it's these little things that kind of like chip away at my perception of him.
I think all of that applies when we talk about villain watch and like how is the villain in this movie. But I think all of that is writing and pacing and structure of the story. In terms of just giving a performance, I would really struggle with us giving Ben Kingsley it and not James Spader. I know that it's a subversive thing, but I think it's a similar sort of like, you know, people don't like what happened, but just the actor is acting his ass off. I don't know. I can see an argument for Jeremy Renner. I think Paul Bettany in his 9 minutes is pretty good.
Oh, that is also, yes, he is. Well, he also gets to do a vocal performance beforehand.
He does. We don't have a spare, so we kind of
I know.
have to come to a consensus.
I'm inclined to say nobody. That's where I'm going to leave it, just because I love James Spader, but I feel like it's one of those performances that I don't think anyone's clamouring to get Spader back.
Maybe
like
not.
This I didn't feel the gut punch in the same way that I did at the end of Black Panther when I realised that this villain wasn't going to come back.
True. I don't know. I feel like I could listen to him talk all day. So maybe you should watch The Blacklist, Ben.
Maybe I should. Maybe if I watch The Blacklist, I would love Ultron more than I do.
It's Robert California for me. All right. Let's say no one for now. I have a plan, but for now, we will say nobody, and we will say that's it for the Age of Ultron. Fitting that we disposed of a discussion about Ultron and saying the end of the Age of Ultron. So next time, we'll be taking it to a much smaller set of stakes, very literally. It's Ant-Man. Paul Rudd's Ant-Man. Not Edgar Wright's Ant-Man, unfortunately. Or fortunately, who fucking knows? So that will be our next episode. Check out entertherealworld.com. You can see our full schedule on there of when everything's going to come out. You should look at that because there are a couple of wrinkles, i.e. Spider-Man Homecoming and what we're doing with Infinity War and the 10-year anniversary. So do look at all that. Do listen to From Broadcast Depths. We will be back with Ant-Man. How hyped are you, Ben Phillips?
I'm hyped to be getting back to less than 1 hour recording times.
Yeah, hopefully.